Welcome to the Cogitarium. We are back for the second series of recordings, and it's an unscripted conversation between the four of us because we love to listen and we love to think together. Now, the feedback from our initial series of films was that it gave people the space and the time to think, and that people said they really valued having time for their thinking to percolate rather than us handing them a solution. This isn't a conversation that is going to be aimed to fix you. So if you're expecting a quick fix and you really like that how-to stuff, then this isn't a thing for you. And there's loads of content out there that can really help you, but this is designed for you to, I guess, enjoy thinking with us at a bit of a slower pace. The reason why we're back and sitting as a Cogitarium is that we've noticed that we've moved into a different phase in the pandemic now, and things are evolving, people's needs are evolving, and our thinking's evolving as well. So our conversation today is going to pick up on some fresh topics that have become increasingly important to the people that we're spending time with, albeit remotely. So you will hopefully recognise the faces on the screen, but just to make sure that if you're watching or listening for the first time, that you recognise the faces and the voices of the people who are thinking together today. So my name is Bev Holden. I'm half of the Clear Thinking Partnership, and I'm a coach and a facilitator and a mental health first aider, and I am delighted to welcome John. So John, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks very much, Bev. My name's John Bartlett. I'm the sole trader for Project Libero. Much of my work is in people's mental health and well-being. I'm a mental health first aid instructor, and I do a lot of work around people's emotional health, mental toughness, and people's sort of capability under stress. Thank you very much.
Pete.
Hi, I'm Pete Bryceland. I'm a business coach and consultant. I spend quite a lot of time helping people who are stressed and overwhelmed or anxious with their businesses. I'm also the developer of personal mental hygiene, which is a new field that I've invented in the last little while. And yeah, it seems to be helping people just to cultivate better mental health practices.
Fabulous. And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Rudder, founder of Ginger Dog Development, coach and facilitator and specialist in mental toughness.
Brilliant. Okay, we sound like a panel from University Challenge. So what we like to do is start our thinking with an opening round of appreciation, because it fires up our brains. It helps us to think really well when we see the whole of the reality that we're dealing with. So the topic that we're going to deal with today is thinking about how we might set ourselves free from feelings of guilt and treat ourselves with more kindness, which we're going to come on to in a minute. So our question for our opening round of appreciation is, how have you been kind to yourself this week? So Sarah, will you kick us off?
Yeah, I will do. I was thinking about this. It's something that's really interesting to me about what's going on at the moment is that I seem to still be really busy doing stuff. And so one of the things I'm trying to make sure I do in terms of kindness is to actually take some time for lunch every day, because it would be really easy to just plow on through the day doing stuff. Busy doing good stuff, you know, it's it's all good stuff, but I'm making sure that I take an hour for lunch and I sit in the garden with something nutritious, and that is my being kind to myself on a daily basis at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you. Pete?
So pretty similar, really. I think a lot of the kindness is about making time for yourself, and so mostly this week I've been making time to just sit and chill. So we've got a house full of people and I'm quite busy at work, so it's nice just to be able to carve out time and sit in a room and chill out and have nobody to talk to or deal with for half an hour, 45 minutes a day. So.
Lovely. John?
I think for me, it's been about, I think, forgiving myself a little bit. That sounds odd, I know. But like Sarah said, I'm quite busy, weirdly, busier than I am normally. And normally I'm very structured with my time, but that's not been available to me because people have been very much, can you squeeze our conversation in here or there? So I find I've kind of stepped away from that, which is not the best thing for my self-care, but I'm forgiving myself and finding opportunities to be kind of okay with the dislocation, which it isn't always easy. But yeah, I think it's just in being able to let some of that stuff go is my sense of it. What about you, Bev?
So I took a very deliberate step halfway through this week and actually had a whole day off. So I think one of the things that I'd noticed was just having a really, really busy head. So full of stuff, all good stuff. But I wasn't able to make sense of it. And I just knew that the thing I needed to do was have a really, almost like an emergency stop. Okay, just brakes on. Okay, let's see what happens now. And it was really good because everything started to settle and I was able to see what I needed to do next. And I'm fortunate to be in a position where I can do that. So it was a very obvious thing for me to do, and something that I really knew that I needed. And I think I listened to my intuition that was telling me that just pause for a minute and see what happens. So that was my act of kindness for myself this week. Great stuff. So our question, I've teased you with it already. So this has come up because I guess the conversations that we've all been having with people, there have been some aspects of those conversations where people have raised that they're feeling guilty about something, because these are strange times that we're in. And so the question for us to think about, in the hope that our cogitation helps others, is how might we set ourselves free from feelings of guilt and treat ourselves with more kindness? So, what do you think, and what are your thoughts? We can start anywhere, actually.
I'm starting.
You can do, yeah.
I have a pretty strong feeling about the word guilt, and for a long time, I've kind of tried to reframe it for people in terms of when I first started coaching, when I first started learning things like NLP and various other self-help methodologies. One of the key things that I've discovered about it and seemed very true for myself was that we're all doing the best we can with the resources that we have at the time. And so for me, when you look at it in terms of that, if you're doing the best you can with the resources that you have at the time, then what is there to be guilty about? Because typically what happens with guilt is something when we reflect on an action or we reflect on a situation, and then we look back at it with the benefit of hindsight. But the thing with hindsight is that's new information because we now have what happened. But when you think about at that time, the only decision or the only action you would have taken is the one that you took, because that was the one that appeared the most right with the resources at that time. And so for me, one of the kindest things that we can do is look upon guilt as something that is almost a wasted emotion, but rather just accept for ourselves that we're doing the best that we can with the resources that we have. And the purpose really of being able to reflect on something is so that we can learn if we need to, not to beat ourselves up, but doing what we could do in that situation with those resources. So for me, I think the biggest thing is to recognize that in ourselves and then treat ourselves with kindness, because we know that what we did was what we did because that's all we could do in that moment. And if we'd have done something, if we could do something else, then we would have done something else. And so where does the guilt sit with that if we know we did the best we could?
Yeah.
I wonder how much of the guilt sits with a need, or there's something here around wanting things to be perfect or wanting to get things right, isn't there? And I certainly hear that talking to a lot of friends and colleagues around, I'm now working from home, still trying to do everything that I would normally do in my job, and also I look after the children, and also, you know, manage my relationship, and also make sure that I get my 1 hour exercise every day. And, you know, and it's like, and it's this never ending kind of list of things that I must do every day in order to be okay, or not even okay, to be perfect, you know, to be achieving that height of perfection that I've set for myself. And of course that's not realistic, and then that leads to us feeling guilty about not doing some of that stuff, I think.
So I think what Pete was saying about guilt being a wasted emotion really strikes me. I think it's, as with all emotions, all feelings, they're temporary, they're transient, and because of the intensity of the guilty feeling and how important it seems, because clearly it must be important if we're feeling this thing so strongly, I think it confuses us, and it tricks us into thinking that it should be taken seriously. So I think we can give ourselves an easier time if we try not to hold on to it, if we try not to explore the reasons for it. And then, Sarah, the thing that you were saying about layering on all those things and having so many things that you must do to be perfect, the thing that I thought was about how that happens in change situations in the workplace, you know. So an organization will layer in another thing and say, so now we're doing this, and everyone tries to continue to do all of the things that they did before plus the new thing. And I think that's what people are doing, instead of I don't know, maybe resetting, or just knowing that it isn't possible, and it's not expected by anyone that you would do all of that stuff. And whose vision of perfection are we living up to anyway? And I know some of the biggest traps I've fallen into personally is where I've set this vision of perfection for myself, not really being clear with myself about what it is, and then tried to live up to it. And that's the thing that's caused me the most difficulty. So John, what do you think?
I mean, it's something that came up in the last series of conversations around people are thinking their feelings and really overthinking their feelings. Going back to what some of Pete said, I think, how useful is it to, but then if you think that all behavior is purposeful, that there are always positive byproducts of negative behavior, what is the guilt trying to tell you? Is I think a lot of people don't really get in and distill what the guilt is trying to tell them. And actually, sometimes the guilt is focused on the things that really matter. But then, as Sarah says, we're always trying to do more and more and more. But I think there's a difference between the guilt and the kindness. And it's like the kind of equalizer levels. There's a thing about how do I feel about feeling guilty? And there's a thing about how do I be kinder to myself, because those things may or may not be related. You can be kinder to yourself and still feel guilty about things. And I think it's interesting that the things that people feel guilt about are very often in their interactions with others and whether they're doing right by everybody else. And we're talking about kindness to self. And very often, because of our guilt, we go on being even kinder to other people rather than kinder to ourselves. And if you go back to that everyone talks about the oxygen mask analogy, that you fit your own oxygen mask before you try and help anybody else. If you're kinder to yourself first, will you be able to be kinder to each others and help deal with the guilt that you have over the interactions and relationships that you have with those people? So I mentioned forgiveness at the start of it. I remember on my NLP, forgiveness, doing exercises around that being incredibly emotional for people. Literally, people bent double with tears about forgiving themselves over something in a relationship, or a breakup situation, or leaving a job, forgiving themselves for the way they spoke in that, and that then enabling a completely different ability to engage with whether they even needed to feel guilt ever again in some cases. So I think for me, there's something about, could we start with kindness and then see what that does to reduce our guilt levels, rather than going in and going, right, let's get rid of the shoulds, let's get rid of the musts and the oughts and all of that. If we think of don't think of a pink elephant analogy, rather than thinking of guilt, let's think about kindness and see what impact being kinder to ourselves and others has on our guilt levels, does it drop that level down? Sarah, you look thoughtful from that. So
I do, because and it's a question rather than a thought,
yeah.
to put out to the rest of you. Why do we find it so difficult to be kind to ourselves? It's, you know, it's absolutely true. We are way better at being kind to other people than we are at being kind to ourselves. And what is that about? I guess is my question. Why is that the case?
Just the easy ones then.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts on that, and I think it stems from very often if we try to do things for ourselves as children, very often we're branded as selfish. And so when we're looking for recognition, typically what we're looking for is what we do for other people rather than what we do for ourselves. So intrinsically, as children, I think we have this idea of self-care. So we look after ourselves first, and then we go to look after other people maybe afterwards. But if it's seen by an adult or a parent, very often we're chided for that selfishness, for that thinking of ourselves first. And as a culture, it's almost put as, okay, you must think of other people first because that's the right thing to do. But then, of course, what we're learning now is actually that really we should put ourselves first, because when we've got a full cup, we've got more to share. But when we've got an empty cup, we've got nothing to share. And so actually, it's more selfish to help everybody else for, you know, without helping yourself than it is to help yourself and come from that position. So I do think that that's probably a massive factor in society at the moment, that we're judged on how we look after other people more than we're judged about how we look after ourselves.
But there's a dichotomy there, though, isn't there, about I'm all right, Jack. And there, if we take it from a financial perspective, some people who think, well, I'm looking after myself first, and then I'll be able to look after others, type thing. You know, your Zuckerbergs and your Bezos have got cash to spare. So, I like the first part of your piece. I'm still struggling with at what point do people pass out of kindness into self-interest ahead of something else? You know what I mean? I think that's intellectually for me, that's a challenge.
Sure.
I wonder if it's a self-esteem thing, actually. That actually we don't always deem ourselves to be worthy of being looked after, and so we don't do it for ourselves. There's something about, you know, do you value yourself enough to look after yourself and top your cup up, to use Pete's analogy. And I think we're good at valuing others without perhaps bringing that value into ourselves.
It's just making me think about Math Potts, who heads up Camarados, and when I saw him speak at Meaning Conference, he said the thing that saved him when he was really struggling with his mental health was helping other people. Actually, that was the thing that fed him, that helped him realize that he was okay and he was a good person. So I think that's quite interesting, that for some people it saves them, that selfless act, and it is back to them. Go on, what, John?
Well, I can personally relate to that. You know my background in terms of the work I do is driven by my own ill health and suicidality at times in my life. So I can speak to that. But I think that's slightly different to the kindness, because some of that is mission orientated, and it's mission creep as well. You don't want anybody to feel like you felt, and that becomes, people kind of go, well, you can speak openly and frankly about that, and suddenly you find yourself heading up something which you perhaps weren't prepared for, and things. And it's good and it's viable, and I can't speak to Matt's experience of it, obviously. But I think it's often how much of that is a survivor's mission type role rather than a kindness. Because if it was a kindness, we'd be in Parliament solving the big socio-political problems. Do you know what I mean? And that's from a personal perspective. It's like if I could get kindness as a thing to work, and the parallel I see is, and Action for Happiness, the organisation that people are probably aware of. And they publish, a wall planner each month. And I've really been seeing those, for example, during the pandemic, is a lot more publication around their content, coming from that perspective of happiness and kindness and all that sort of stuff. But I still don't think it's interesting how that's now. I'm curious, and there's a cynicism in me. I'm very aware. I'm interested to see where that goes. Late June, early July, August, Christmas. What will we still feel then? Because I think almost will we almost run out of energy to be kind, because we'll have almost used up all our skill level expertise at it. It's just something that occurs. So I've talked myself into a corner a bit there, but
so I don't think that kindness is a finite resource. So I think that it's replenishable. That
I don't disagree.
Yeah. Just think people will be weary of it.
Yeah, there's a phenomenon in carers and mental health professionals called compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
And so I know I'm not really speaking out of turn in terms of my wife, but she's a nurse, and I know that sometimes she feels that because she's caring for people every single day. She works in a GP surgery, and she does a lot of triage nursing. And so one of the things there is sometimes she feels herself getting very short with people who, on one side of things feel like they're wasting her time. And as soon as she starts to recognize that, she takes that as a signal, not as there's something wrong with her, but that's almost like a signal to take some time. And again, it's so with that, it's not that she feels guilty when she has compassion fatigue, but rather she recognizes that as an indicator to take some time for herself, to be able to sit back and think about things differently, show herself some kindness, and then she's able to carry on. And I think it's normal. I think you're right, Bev, that kindness is an infinite resource. But I think that in terms of the body, in terms of who we are on a day-to-day basis, I think that sometimes we have to recognize that innate resilience psychologically is not built in necessarily physiologically. So we start to feel the physiological effects, and that's what then we interpret as sometimes that's our mental health suffering, as opposed to that's our physical health suffering, and it's an indication that we need to take that time to look after ourselves.
Yeah, I really like the point you're saying there, Pete, about she's got the self-awareness about what she needs to do, and she's got her it's like she doesn't beat herself up about feeling that way. But one of the ways to be kind is to be kind to herself first, which will bring more kindness to others, which will give her the space and time. I think one of the things that people don't really know is how to practice self-compassion, to be kind to oneself. I think a lot of us know that, okay, a good walk, go easy on the alcohol. We know a lot of, obvious self-care stuff, but do we know what emotional self-care, that the kindness to self really is for us, for us as individuals? I know, I'm friends with each of you at varying levels. I would know, I think, in some ways, what would be appropriate to help each of you in a different situation. And I've got an awareness of what I need. Have I communicated that to what I need kindness-wise from you to each of you? Yeah, a little bit. But mine is hard-won experience from ill health. So that being the case, how can we get people to calibrate and work out how to be kind to themselves and to deploy it more often, and to think this should be a default setting for me? You see what I mean?
I think the default setting thing is an important thing. I found a really nice quote yesterday, which was, being kind to yourself only when you deserve it is like watering a plant only when it rains. Which is kind of, makes me think of that, because it should be the default thing. So it's almost, it switches around from Pete's description before about being told that it's not appropriate for us to be selfish and be kind to ourselves, because that's, you know, we've got to look after others. But actually, you know, if we were kind to ourselves every day, if that was the default, then people would have a different experience and would maybe be able to let go of that guilt much more quickly, knowing that there's information in it that perhaps they can choose to use, but they don't have to hang around in that feeling. It's fine to leave it behind. You don't have to punish yourself, because guilt to me feels like a thing we do to beat ourselves. And so how long do you keep hitting yourself on the head with the guilt hammer before you realise that you've done enough damage and you've learned everything you need to learn, and it's okay now to dial up the kindness conversation that's going on in your head? Because that's where the kindness thing happens often. It's the talking in the head. We do things physiologically to be kind to ourselves, but I think most of it, or the really useful stuff, probably happens inside our heads. That's kind of...
I mean, and something I know, it's a play on words with guilt, but I often think of guilt as like a level of tarnish, like GILT, a guilt. You know, it's not properly gold. It's just guilt. You've just applied a thin veneer on top, and I sometimes feel that about guilt as a thing. It's almost like it's a thing which tarnishes and rubs away, or can do. Yeah, that's just how it sits on me at times. You know.
This is interesting though, isn't it? Because if we think back to what I was saying earlier on around the guilt coming from actually not doing all the things I feel I should be doing during the day, and therefore perhaps not then making time for myself. Just to pick up on your point, Bev, actually, if being kind starts with what's going on in my head, then that doesn't need me to take out a big chunk of time to do it. That's not like having to go and do my hours exercise, is it, to feel as though I'm being kind to myself? That's just about noticing, what is this inner voice saying to me that's not very kind, and what could I replace that with? What else could be true, or what else could I tell myself that might enable me to be more resourceful, or to be in a kinder inner space, I guess.
I mean, you guys will all know I'm not great at the mindfulness thing everyone talks about, but the nearest that I've found is the work of Michael Chaskalson, who's a well-known author on mindfulness, and he did a book with Megan Wright called Mind Time, and their model is AIM. So there's allowing, inquiry, and the meta-awareness, but even just allowing stuff to unfold in front of you, I have found to be a real kindness, rather than thinking I need to shape it, change it, do whatever. Even just allowing it just to be, before I get into inquiring what else is going on, what's that triggering in me, and then being able to step back and perhaps think about things differently. But just the kindness to myself of not being drawn in has been so handy to me. And of course, because it's AIM when you put them all together. But I find that to be just that permission element to be really powerful, being permission to be kind to myself. And I said about like forgiveness, permission to forgive myself at the start of the recording. You know, there's so much of this stuff I feel comes down to permission, what we will permit ourselves, allow ourselves to feel. Yeah.
Okay, so it would probably be a good time to think about how we bring our thinking to a pause around this. So I'm going to pose the question again. How might we set ourselves free from feelings of guilt and treat ourselves with more kindness? What more do you think or feel or want to say?
So for me, something that was coming up when John was speaking about that there's a positive with all feelings that we have, or all behaviours at some level. I think that potentially it's the recognition of feelings like guilt, the feelings that we call negative feelings because they make us feel uncomfortable, almost as a signal to indicate that we need to treat ourselves with kindness, or we need to treat ourselves with the opposite of that feeling. So if you're starting to feel guilty, it may just be that is an indication within your own ecosystem to say you need to start being kind to yourself. Because obviously we're not designed to have uncomfortable feelings. They're designed to promote action. Like if you get a stone in your shoe, you don't just walk around with it going, oh my God, I've got a stone in my shoe, how crap. You stop and you take the stone out and relieve that pressure. And it's almost like, you know, maybe guilt is an indication that, you know, we need to relieve that pressure and treat ourselves with kindness.
Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just picking up on the point that we toyed with just then, which is stop thinking that you have to make space and time to be kind to yourself, and focus on what's going on up here in terms of kindness. Perhaps I think that's something that we can all do, is just notice that little voice and what it's saying about us not being good enough, and change that into something more helpful and more kind.
Cool. I think my thing is building on Pete's point, with a metaphor that I really like, which is the one about the rumble strip. So if you're driving along the motorway and the rumble strip is on the side of the carriageway, when you hit that rumble strip, you know that you're likely to be going off into a ditch if you carry on that course. And the feelings that you don't like, so the guilty feelings, if that's your rumble strip, it is telling you to just adjust your course and get back on track. And I think that's a really useful reminder that it's just a rumble strip. How lucky we are that actually we get to feel that stuff so that we can change our direction and change our course, maybe. John, how about you?
I think for me, just something which just came at the end there, really, from the stuff that you were all saying, is about how much of this is in our head and how much of this is in our heart, because we think of kindness as a heart thing, don't we? It's something you do out of love, or, you know, a kindness sort of thing, and get with something very heady. So I think there's something about, can you align head and heart to help when you're being, you know, would that help kindness? That's my sort of final thought there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for thinking together and independently. And let's pause there, and then we'll come back in a little while with the next question for our conversation.